Thank you so much for joining our launch event for this really important toolkit that we're releasing today, and you're all going to get first look at it. My name is Lincoln Mundy. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Communications and Strategy here at Advocates for Youth. For those of you that don't know, Advocates for Youth is a national organization that's been around for 40 years, focused on young people's sexual health and reproductive health and rights. A lot of times we hear from people to stay in our lane, since people have such a linear view of what sex education, what reproductive health and justice is, but this is exactly our lane. A young person's zip code, their race, their disability, their area in terms of like food deserts or medical deserts, all of that has a real impact on a young person's sexual health and rights. And so at Advocates for Youth, we champion and support policies and programs that understand young people's need and rights to equitable sex education, to not feeling scared and afraid to go to school because of police down every hallway. And so I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Sydney, who's going to share a little bit more about what we do at Advocates before we get into our stuff today.
Yeah, thank you, Lincoln. Well, Lincoln summed it up very well, so I will be brief. But we believe a lot of things here at Advocates. I'm not going to go through this whole entire list, but as you can see, we have a lot of great things going on. And so we believe that reproductive justice is a part of our liberation. Something we'll talk about a little bit later, is how reproductive justice is connected to the work that we're doing to remove police from schools and invest in sexual education. We believe that HIV discrimination must end. We believe that Black Lives Matter. And we believe that everyone deserves an education-free from gender-based violence. And so we make all of this happen in a variety of ways, which is very much longer than this list that we have on the screen. But the biggest thing, or the main things that we do, is that we train educators, parents, and physicians and other trusted adults on how to build supportive environments for LGBTQ youth. Our digital projects, which is something that I work on. I'm the digital content manager. And so we work on amazing projects like Muslim Ann, Abortion Out Loud, My Story Out Loud, and we all use these storytelling techniques to spur policy and cultural change. And we also partner with brands to educate students about condoms, and we organize to make birth control pills over the counter. So you can follow the hashtag Free the Pill to learn more about that. And we also have the Free the Pill virtual store that you can go and explore if you're curious to learn more about bringing birth control pills over the counter.
Thanks so much, Sydney. If you go back one slide, I also want to make kind of a housekeeping note that you should have the availability to have live captions. So here's how you turn them on. They're at the bottom. With Zoom, just click closed captions and show subtitles, and then you should be able to turn on live captions. So the reason why you came here today is to get the first look at this toolkit. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to introduce my colleagues Kinjo and our partner Kino at PowerU, who are going to share a little bit more about the report. We'll definitely have time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box so that we can get to them at the end. But before that, I just wanted to lay out some context. Last summer, Advocates for Youth produced a series of protester trainings where young people across the country joined to learn about jail support and digital privacy when going to protesting and their rights at protesting, and really how to make actionable change in their communities. And from this feedback, we started planning a 3-day institute specifically focused on how youth activists can work to get police out of their schools. So this January, we held, again, a 3-day institute that covered everything from the problem with information and research to the solution, how to find budgets. We had wonderful partners who educated our young people and our partners on how to make an impactful campaign plan. So that's where we were. And all of that stuff was really focused on giving young people the tools and the resources they need to make action and get police out of their schools. And so before we get to the core of the report, I wanted to share with you sort of our ethos around it by this short video that's featuring a couple of our Youth Activist Network members. Really underscores the problem with police in schools, our proposed solution, and how we're going to work together to take action. So I'll ask Sydney to play that now.
Problem. Police and schools don't keep students safe.
The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world.
And for Black young people and other young people of color, minor infractions within schools are highly criminalized.
And funneling young people of color into the prison system through punitive disciplinary practices, commonly known as the school to prison pipeline.
In many places around the US, continuously increasing funding for police departments is prioritized while public schools are continuously under-resourced.
Solution. If schools truly want to set up all young people to lead safe and healthy lives, budgets need to align with values.
Money being spent on police that create unsupportive learning environments should be redirected to support sexual health education that's honest and inclusive.
School counselors well-versed in childhood trauma,
Lactation centers for young parents, and so many other tangible resources we know can improve the education, health, and well-being of young people.
Action.
We are the ones we have been waiting for.
If you believe that schools need to divest from police and reinvest money into the health, well-being, and safety of young people,
Take action today. Visit advocatesforyouth.org/divest to start a campaign to pressure schools in your local community to divest from police and invest in young people.
Thanks so much, and special shout out to the illustrator Radical Roadmap, who created that wonderful piece along with our Youth Activist Network. So now I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague Kinjo, who's the Associate Director of Organizing at Advocates for Youth, to share more about her work in authoring this report and go from there. Take it away, Kinjo.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kinjo Kiyama. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of Youth Organizing at Advocates. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Defunding the police is a reproductive justice issue. Both movements for abolition and reproductive justice are centered around the need for bodily autonomy and self-determination for all people. Advocates for Youth is dedicated to supporting young activists in advocating for their schools to divest from policing and criminalization and instead invest in reproductive justice and comprehensive sex education. And we're launching this toolkit so that activists have the tools to do exactly that. Think about the billions of dollars that are spent on policing and militarization at the local, state, and federal level every single year. What would it look like in your local community if we could instead use those resources so that every person can get the health care they need, can afford to parent if they want to, and have the resources to ensure they do not become a parent if they don't want to? The toolkit we're launching today is centered around the campaign of Miami-based organization, Power U Center for Social Change, and their campaign to get police out of schools and to get public schools to invest in sex education, nurses, school counselors, and other resources students really need. We really hope that by reading this report about their visionary campaign, you can replicate a similar project in your local community. So we know that police in schools don't keep people safe, especially young people of color. Young people need a safe environment to learn everything, whether that be math or sex ed or history. And when so many encounters with the police turn violent, schools with police are not a safe environment for many students. We also know that so many public schools are under-resourced. Our schools struggle with funding resources that actually help young people stay safe and healthy, things like sex education, health centers, and LGBTQ resources. Additionally, schools with police are more likely to refer young people to law enforcement, and Black students are more likely to be targeted. That alone is good enough reason to get cops out of schools. But change just won't automatically happen, and we have to come together to demand more for our students and for our communities. We're really excited and grateful to work in partnership with Power U Center for Social Change. Power U is organizing and developing the leadership of Black and Brown young people and Black women in South Florida so that they may help lead the struggle to liberate all oppressed people. I'll pass it to Kino to talk more about Power U and their work.
Yeah, thank you, Kendra. So hello, everybody. I'm Kino, pronouns he, him. I'm really excited to be here. Love to have conversations about, what does real change look like? What does it look like to make sure that our young folks are situated in heavily resourced to make sure that they are successfully becoming full developed young folks, right? And adults in the long run. So Power U and the work that we've been up to. We have like a 5-year system, or a 5-phase process that like largely moves folks from like recruitment through orientation, and moving folks into campaigns, and like actually having them knocking on doors and being civically engaging to the community to understand what is the issue, what are the problems that students are having, what are the problems that parents are seeing within their community largely. And then from there, they move through this through a process of like joining committees, right? And I think largely I'm going to talk a lot about my committee, but from that committee process, we are organizing young folks, or giving skills to young folks to organize their peers, their parents, and their teachers to move folks through a budget process, which ultimately makes them decision makers when it comes to what is needed, what needs to be prioritized, or what funding needs to be allocated to where. I think largely I really enjoyed that video of just showing that like to really create change. Like my mom said, it's like, you know, put your money where your mouth is. So like to really create change, to really see change, look, you have to put funding, you have to put money in towards it. And that actually shows people that like this is serious to you. This is a priority for you. And I think largely we go through these from 5 to 6 phases each year. And this is going into our 3rd year of doing this. And it's been super exciting to see young folks, especially from year 1, and this is their 3rd year, and being able to flex their muscles, flex these skills that actually gets reaction from our school board, gets reactions from our superintendent, and like they are listening, right? There's ways that they are increasing or doing what we want. It might not be the full amount, but they are listening, and they do have to see where we're coming from. So largely my work is around removing less. So the committee itself is called Counselors Not Cops. We are demanding to remove SROs from our schools. The campaign all together is a part of a national campaign called Police Free Schools that we're working with AEJ and Advancement Project. And like largely what's happening, young folks will join my committee after orientation, after they become members. And orientation is a super great process. We do the whole month of January. Folks have 13 sessions. They have to like retain most of the information, and after that they join into these committees. And once they get into my committee, there's like a piece around political education. There's this piece around understanding what is the issue, what is the problem. I think there's a big difference between both of those things, right? The problem is the larger thing that like everybody is facing. Issues are like little things that you can tackle to make sure that problem is actually being like broken down. So like young folks are moving through these processes that largely gets them to understand that like what I'm asking for isn't far-fetched. Like it is something that I can actually attain. And the way to do that is by educating myself, but largely organizing my peers, my parents, and my teachers to get them involved in this process as well. Our hope and our vision around CNC, which is Counselors Not Cops, is around like, how do we move folks through this process? How do we get folks to become decision makers? But largely, how do we give access to young folks and resources to young folks that like actually do not discriminate them, do not prison them, do not monitor them, do not police them, but actually think about their well-being and really think about not this piece around what happens after the harm happens, right? But more of what is the prevention, what is the intervention of like making sure that our young folks are not exiled or pushed through the school to prison pipeline, right? And I think largely we have seen, even through the pandemic, like students are still ending up in jail. Like it's just mind blowing to be like for Miami Dade, we are a SRO, which is school resource officers, which also just police officers. We are mandated. Our schools, Florida in general, is like, you know, you have to have at least one SRO within our education system, and it's a law, right? So like how, like, you know, and we see what our state, what our school board prioritize versus like, why isn't it not a mandate to have at least 2 mental health professionals in our education system. Like Miami itself only has one paid nurse. Like, everything else is outsourced, right? There's a lot of different things that when it comes to like what young folks needs to have this, prevention and intervention, those things are outsourced while Miami-Dade has their own police department. So like we have Miami-Dade County Police Department, we have Miami-Dade School Police Department. We are the 4th largest district. They talk about it all the time, and they're super proud to like have a police department that is about 51 to $100 million, like just funding going into that, right? While for our mental health department, it's only $8.2 million, and they only have about 73 coordinators, and we have about 392 schools, 350,000 students. That is not sufficient, but they make sure that like each school has a full-time police officer or SRO there, with the number of going up to about 500 SROs, right? So we see the harm, and we move young folks through this, right? And then the hope is that if we are able to really get our school board to value our opinions, our purpose, and really get, I think this is the piece that's like super important, is that like parents and teachers are going to be the most important people because they are able to vote. Like if we could start campaigns that like have young folks to vote around things that they want to see inside their education system, because they're going through this education system, that would be like super amazing. But right now, like we have to like push parents and teachers to be making these decisions and actually voting folks out that doesn't make sense to be there. Like our school board superintendent is our superintendent is hired, and then largely our school board folks are voted in, and their terms can go really, really long. And then largely nobody's actually like contesting them at all. So we have had folks, like our superintendent's been here from 2008, hasn't seen any real changes. Like we have our District 2 school board folk has been here for like the past 16 years, haven't seen any real changes, right? So I think largely we are moving through a process of like, how do we get folks to become decision makers? How do we start to really push this vision of what is hopeful, what is possible if students had fully funded mental health, right? Or had nurses within their school, and like really good paid nurses, or high wage teachers that like want to stay around. And what is possible if students do not have SROs in their education system? And I think largely there's a lack of brutality that you'll see, the lack of students being referred to law enforcement, and just overarching, this whole school to prison pipeline will actually start to dismantle, right? And I think just before I'm gonna close out right here, I know I've been talking a good amount, is that when we think about, because folks are like, well, all students get in trouble, well, all students, go through the juvenile detention center and stuff. I think largely this is true. But I think just thinking about population, like in Florida, there's only 22% of Black students that actually is enrolled in the education system in Florida, but we make up about 46 to 50% of students that are being referred to the juvenile detention center. So that's double the amount of us actually inside of our schools. So that's like that is some like a visual, just a quick visual, and I'll stop there. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much, Kino, and Power You for your commitment to organizing for better schools alongside young people in Miami-Dade. If you're hearing what Power You and what Kino just shared, and you feel inspired to organize for your school district to divest from police and instead invest in young people's well-being, we hope you download our toolkit today to learn more. Here's a brief overview of what's included, and also just how to help you start thinking about how to do this kind of work in your own school. So first, think about why you want to do this, right? Look into how much exactly your school district and your city spend on policing every year. Think about how much it could benefit students if that money went towards things that benefit young people instead of criminalizing them, right? Or as Kino just talked about, putting your money where your mouth is. Remember that this is also about how budgets are moral documents. So we are illustrating to the broader public that our cities and our school districts right now are choosing to invest in violence and criminalization instead of investing in basic things that young people need and deserve in public schools, like comprehensive sex ed, like counselors, and like nurses. Then, after you've, sort of grounded yourself in your purpose and why you want to do this, connect with like-minded individuals and groups. Remember that activism is not done alone, and this is all about taking collective action. Talk to other people in your community who care about this and who believe that your school or your city should divest from policing and caging people and instead invest into resources like school nurses, counselors, comprehensive sex education, and so many other things that we could list that are currently under-resourced. Connect with people who feel similarly and recruit them to take action alongside you, because we know we cannot succeed in making real change alone. Then, after you've sort of connected with people, learn more about these issues, I would encourage you to do some more research into your school districts and city budget, and also to read through our toolkit, the resources in the appendix, and learn more about abolition, reproductive justice, and organizing generally. There's a long history behind these movements, and many have written and spoken about these topics, and having more information will help you overcome obstacles and people who are opposed to what you are asking for. Finally, make a strategy and take action. So, do a little research, write down your plans for how you will act, and pressure your school and your community to change for the better and make tangible changes that support young people's well-being. To learn more about creating a plan to win, divestment from police, and investment in reproductive justice and sex education, you can download our toolkit today. I will turn it back to Lincoln to get started with Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kinjo and Kino, for sharing more about what's in the report. I just wanted to show you this table of contents here that has obviously the breadth of what the report covers, from the issue of policing in schools with the facts and research to how Kino and their comrades at Power U built their own campaign, which was successful in getting Miami-Dade to invest more in comprehensive sex ed and things that we know supports young people, as well as how you, whether you're in your community or your college campus or public school, can really work and create a campaign, just as Kinjo was talking about, to get police out of schools. So now we'll turn to Q&A. So if you have a question, please submit it via the Q&A function on Zoom, or put your question in the chat. To get us started, I did have one question, and I think hearing you, Kino, talk about the impetus and like what was going on in Miami-Dade, could you share like what was the biggest like lessons you learned after taking this on? Like what was one of the biggest lessons that you learned after doing all this work? And as you continue to do this work, what is something that you would encourage other activists to really hone in on or kind of learn from your experience?
Yeah, I think largely to be an activist, you need to be organizing. You need to get into an organization. You need to get into some type of leftist group. That's going to be the most important thing. I think largely, it's great to mobilize, to protest, but that's not where like real change happens in. I think largely it is like the spark, the frustration that like the agitation actually gets folks to be activated, which is amazing. But I think once you are agitated and you want to be activated, you should be organizing, and it has to be on the ground level. What does it look like for you to be talking to folks, and then just largely moving through this process? I think this year might have been like my most smoothest or like best transition year, just based off of we took a lot of time in meeting with departments within our education system, and we called it research actions, and we just ID key folks that plays a role in why we are seeing what we see, and then getting clarity from them. And what was super beautiful about it was the fact that meeting with these folks, you assume that they're your opposition, and then it's like actually these folks are like just neutral to like passive opposition, and it's like they are hoping and wanting the same thing that you're wanting, but like because of how the system works, they have to play a different game. So it was just really amazing just to hear that like we was asked for more mental health, and it's like, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And like the mental health support that we're giving y'all right now, we know it's not sufficient, but this is the best that we're doing in this moment. And it's like, well, like we are here to challenge you to do better, you know? So I think largely.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. We have a question from Shelby Wilkins for Kinjo, and that question is, what is the most accurate way to look up police budgets in our cities or school districts?
Yeah, so you know, a lot of the times things about like the bureaucracy in your local community can be really hard to understand for the average person, but for public school districts in general, you can start with sort of like doing a little bit of research and digging online just to see sort of like what information is available about how much is being spent per year. But as I said, sometimes it can definitely be difficult for like the average person to understand sort of like what's going on in the budgets, and also like the different funding streams, for example, from like the state or the federal government, and how that impacts like a specific school district or a specific city. So just know that like some information is available online, but also like oftentimes, honestly, it is hard for the average person to understand, even for people who've been organizing for abolition and for, you know, the police to be defunded for a while. It is challenging. So, you know, I think starting there is a good place, but then also like, you know, Kino and like Power U have done a really great job at sort of like engaging with the budget process of Miami-Dade public schools. So for example, when there are, you know, sort of just like town halls or things where you can go and engage with people in power in your school district, whether that be like a hearing on the budget for public schools or some other sort of forum that people who live in a particular school district can participate in, I would also encourage you to just like go there and ask questions in a public setting when it is possible. So I would just start with like doing some research online, and then from there, you'll probably have some sort of like questions or like pieces that you're like, I really don't understand, and this feels really obscure. And then look at sort of like the calendar of events that your school district might have, and sort of see like where are the public forums you can go to ask people. And then I think if you actually launch a campaign, right, and you're actually like making these demands of your school district, there's probably, once you've, you know, built up some sort of momentum or people power, right? Like if you, let's say you get thousands of people, for example, to sign a petition calling on your school to divest from policing and invest in sex education. At a certain point, once you've built up people power, your campaign target, otherwise known as like the person in power, like a superintendent who could make a decision to like change the budget of the school district. If you've built up enough people power, at a certain point, they may engage with you, sort of like how Kino was describing, like meeting with people in power within a school district. So also, you know, if you've done the research online, you've gone to every public forum you can to ask like questions, then you want to, and if you're still not getting the answers and it still feels really difficult to understand, you want to sort of like escalate and build momentum behind that, so that, you know, people in power are pressured into like at least talking with you, meeting with you, and engaging with you. And then you could ask even more specific questions from there to sort of understand what's going on. And I just want to say again, like it can often be difficult to understand. So don't feel like, you know, it's just you or you're alone if you're sort of like struggling to understand what your school budget is saying. Like I feel like oftentimes it's hard for the average person to sort of like grasp the fuller picture, but you know, just stay committed and ask as many people as you possibly can to sort of get some sort of answers from people in power.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kinjo. I think, Kino, just to that point, I saw in the NPR article that you were featured in that it listed kind of what Miami-Dade, what your school district was spending on police versus other things. How did the process for your organizing coalition go about getting the budget information?
Yeah, so it's, as I said, it's been a 3-year process for us largely, but I think ending of 2018, we left out with a report card, just like talking about how our Miami-Dade school was failing us. So we gave them F around like transparency. We gave them F around like student engagement, right? And then from there we was moved through this process of like, how do we engage in this budget? How do we get clarity around the budget? And then working with University of Miami, we went to the school board and was like, this is what we know. Like, this is what from the research that UM did, from the research that RU was doing, and from the information that came from the Miami-Dade Department of Education from Florida. Like, we was like, oh, this is what we know. And like our superintendent was like, he got really frustrated. He's like, you're wrong. Everything is wrong. And it was like, well, if this is the case, how do we get access, right? And then from there, we got to be a part of this school board committee, committee advisory space, right? And from there, we started to meet with the chief financial officer of Miami-Dade, and it just projected us into like getting much more clarity around the budget. I know I've seen a question about Crystal that talks a little bit around the budget, and I was like, this is like, I think largely it is not by mistake that you don't know about the budget. Like, they do, like, folks in power do not want you to engage in the budget, because then they can put money any type of way that they want to. And then I think just the jargon and just the jargon, how is represented or like presented, it just doesn't make sense. And I'm being very clear, without the help of UM, with the help of scholars and experts, we would have not understood this, or it would have took us much longer than what we have been going into. And then just to touch on a little bit more of the question, I think largely SROs are not ran by, not hired by, SROs nor security guards are not hired by principals. So I think there's a question around what autonomy do principals have, what type of funding do principals have. I think like when you think about like non-negotiable, like SROs are part of non-negotiable like people that they need to hire, and they are being pushed through a formula that's made by the Miami-Dade County like police, and it's a formula that they created that largely generates how many SROs, how many security guards need to be at each of these schools, and then largely you have to tackle it at a district level. And then, as I said, there's also just for Florida itself, I know there's other places too, but it's also at a state level that's happening. But I think what's real is that these school districts, they have more autonomy than they say they do. It's like, when we talk about them, it's like, it's neither either or. We want counselors and police officers, or there's like this comment of this is what's like the state is telling us to do this, but there are ways that they can limit interaction between SROs and students that they're not doing. Like, SROs are like not only playing like law enforcement, they also playing like punisher too. It's like if a young person gets into some trouble, they are the first things that folks are calling to handle like disputes or disruption or dress code violations, or conduct violations that like actually gives students much more harm than actually what is needed, right? And I think largely there's like a lot of work. There's like in his own bucket, principals have a lot of autonomy. What happens within the schools, but largely they have to like respect what's going on with the district, and then the district also plays roles with the state. And I think what's real is that neither of those groups are actually challenging anybody. Like, they just go along with what's happening. The district don't actually ask for more money or challenge the state. The state just does whatever they wants to do, and then lastly, the principals do not actually like. There's a group of principals that work together, but like they don't actually move in a good way.
Thank you, Kino. I think that's a good point. You don't have to do everything yourself. That's the point of building a broad-based coalition, whether it's getting your academic tax people from local colleges or numbers people just working together to figure out how to focus on your targets. There are a couple of questions around the same theme that I'll pitch to Kinjo. And it's really about like, how do you link the topics of policing and sex education together to administrators who don't buy into the divest invest model?
That is a great question. So my answer to that is, so we Advocates for Youth, we support young activists all over the US who organize for, specific changes in their local communities. And in my experience, oftentimes when students are demanding that their schools do more, whether that be by implementing sex ed, providing condoms, menstrual products, or just like other things that would advance reproductive justice in schools, oftentimes administrators of schools, people in power, act like sexuality and reproductive justice are too controversial or like niche for them to focus on or prioritize. And also when, people do pressure them, they're kind of like, there's no money to fund these things, right? There's no money to provide sex ed. There's no money to give people menstrual products, condoms, like things that they actually need, right? But so I would say, people in power often don't want to rock the boat and invest in things like sex ed and LGBTQ resources. And I'm noticing how the fact that there's no money is a really common refrain in a response to people organizing for reproductive justice within schools and generally. But notice how when people in power say they want to build a jail, when they want to give the police more funding, when they want to hire more SROs to brutalize people of color in schools, no one ever says, where's the money, right? Like, I think this is something I've observed over and over again, that whenever someone is demanding something that would actually like help people, that would advance reproductive justice and give students the things, especially students of color, the things they need to thrive, it's suddenly like, whoa, like there's no money for that. But the moment they want to cage people and brutalize people, there's millions of dollars, like no questions asked. So I think, that's sort of how I am seeing it. I just want to say that like people in power are allowing this status quo where we invest millions and billions of dollars into violence. That's just the norm, right? But not caring for students, acting as if we're asking for too much for just like bare minimum resources to be there, it is a common sort of like response to what we're demanding. So I would say if you're interested in organizing this campaign in your community, sort of keep that in mind. And I think really center the things you're asking for money to be invested into, center that and why it's important and really valuable for students, right? We know how many students like don't have sex education in public schools. Like, a lot of states invest in abstinence only. And when you start to build this campaign and talk to other people in your community, just ask them, what would your life look like if, we all had sex education and other, things like nurses and counselors and those types of resources. Just start to get people thinking about like, what would our lives look like if, the schools actually like invested deeply into people of color, into youth of color, and making sure they have what they need to be like safe and supported in schools. And I think just center that and how valuable it is. And then, as time goes along, like, I feel like a lot of the times when you engage with people in power, they'll sort of like try to say that there's not resources for sex ed or whatever else you're demanding connected to like sexuality and reproductive justice. And that's when you can say, if you've done the research, well, look at how much money they spent on, building another juvenile detention center. Look at how many SROs were added to our schools this year. They might say there's no money, but you can sort of prove like, well, look at these millions of dollars that are invested into caging people. So I think that is how I link the two in my mind. And I'm wondering, Kino, if you have any thoughts about like linking abolition and reproductive justice.
Yeah, I think I don't see any different. I don't see the difference. I think just based off of how I was like rooted into reproductive justice, like in the lens of reproductive justice, like body autonomy, choice to have birth, and then largely it's like the ability to live in a world that like actually best support your child. And I think that actually connects to like my child not going to jail or my child not being criminalized. Like it just can go hand in hand. I think that's largely the way that Power Youth has been pushing. I think we are a reproductive justice organization. And even like when you think about how we are trying to get students civilly engaged, how are we trying to stop this the SROs and like the discrimination and like the criminalization of students, that is all in hopes to keep pushing a reproductive justice lens. So I think I didn't like when we do our work, my work is not separate from reproductive justice. I think largely it is restorative justice is a part of just reproductive justice in general. Like that is the way, that's where we're going. And that's like type of the framework that we are constantly trying to move in. if that makes sense.
Definitely.
I know it's really simple, but that's what we had.
Yeah, and the toolkit that you'll receive does have a lot of really good messaging and frameworks that the co-authors put together that you can use to craft your argument and to craft your work as you get started on the campaign. Speaking of getting started, this question is for Kinjo and then Kino for follow-up. April asks, what would be a good way to start mobilizing people, building people power, and to educate other people or encourage them to get educated?
That's a great question. So I think Kino sort of emphasized earlier just about the importance of like joining organizations, right? So either I would say join like a local grassroots organization or form your own team to start to work on this. I think the most important thing to remember is that, again, this is about collective action. It's not just you like, meeting with a superintendent one-on-one to try and convince them, but about you getting as many people as possible within your school district to pressure the superintendent for the same thing. So I think, first start with like either building a team, like, even if you have one or two friends who are supportive, right? The team doesn't have to be super big at first. You can just start with a few people who are like dedicated and committed to this. And then once you, sort of started that team, you want to build as many relationships with people who might be supportive as possible. So think about everyone in your life, right? Your classmates, your friends, people from, other organizations, and can you sit down with them one-on-one and sort of talk to them about like, okay, like we're seeing, all these SROs in our schools and how much money our school district is investing in this every year. And we really think, that our school should no longer have abstinence only education and should divert those resources and put them into something good for students, right? So once you've, started a team, you want to think about all the people, even loosely, who might be relatively supportive, and talk to them one-on-one to try and get them to join that team. And then after you've got a couple people, then you want to start doing more public facing things, right? You could do sort of like events or workshops about like, what are students experiencing in your schools right now? How is the lack of sex education impacting students in your schools? How is the presence of police in schools impacting students? You want to sort of start like public conversations with events like teach-ins, workshops, to get people to start thinking about like, wow, like our school invests millions of dollars into caging students, into SROs, and they don't invest into nurses, sex ed, all these other things. And from there, you're going to start to get more and more public support. And then you want to start doing a little bit of research into sort of like, the school district and, the superintendent maybe, and like what they believe in and what public stances you've taken. And then you want to get all the people you've educated and mobilized to take action to pressure this person to make a change. And you want to just, keep committed to bringing in more and more people as time goes on, as you do more events, as you do actions, more people will sort of see what you're doing, and that'll spark conversations and think about how can you get those people involved. So I would just really emphasize this is about collective action. We need as many people as possible to win. And you want to bring as many people into the fight as we can to pressure your school district to do better and to give students the things they need and deserve. So that would be my answer about mobilization. Kino, do you have any thoughts to add?
I think largely there's this piece around clarity around what is the issue, what is the problem, right? And like how are you engaging the masses, right? So who needs to be a part of this? Like Adine, who needs to be a part of this? Who should you be working with? Are there already local groups that are already taking on some of these issues? And then largely how are you engaging the community? So is it like you knocking on doors? Are you doing listening sessions? Are you like creating small town halls? I think those are the ways that you initially start building a capacity to organize, by actually identifying what is the problem largely, and then what are some issues that you can take on to get this to happen. And then from there, it's like the piece of like re-education. Like I think what is not helpful when we think about re-education is not like, oh, I know the answers, here's the answers, move in that way, but like really have folks engage in dialogue and questions that like move from like this blanket method of education, like this is what I'm giving you, and you need to regurgitate it back out to everybody else, but more of like, why is this important, and like really being in healthy conflict, because I think iron sharpens iron, and like that's how you really start to move forward.
Thank you. One question from Crystal gets to whether or not you think it's possible to defund and abolish SROs by individual schools versus the entire district. Crystal mentions that we are going to have so much resistance, but what if there was a principal who was open to it? Does it need to be divestment from the district as a whole, or can it be school by school?
That's a great question. So I think I would encourage you to generally focus on targeting a superintendent, so the person above the whole school district, versus the specific principal. The reason why is because an individual school's principal can only have like so much power within like a school district, right? Like they are overseeing one high school, but the superintendent is overseeing sort of like all of the district. So the superintendent is more likely the person who could say yes or no to what we're demanding, right? And we're demanding divestment from police, investment in sex ed, and reproductive justice. So I would also, like, beyond that, think about if you have that one principal that you know is supportive, how could you leverage that principal's support for this also, right? So let's say, you have a relationship with the principal of your high school, and, they agree that like too much money is spent on SROs, and that, the school needs more nurses, the school needs sex ed. If the principal's already on your side and you have some sort of rapport with them, think about how can you, use that relationship to also get more information about the school districts and how it operates, right? Because as we sort of talked a few questions ago, a lot of the times like the budget is kind of obscure for like the average person to understand. And you, after looking at information you can find online, you'll probably have a lot of specific questions about like the funding stream, how it works, who makes decisions. So, if you do know your individual principal is supportive, definitely work to build a stronger relationship with that person, because that principal also probably has insights into how the school district works that you as an individual student or just like a supportive community member probably don't have. And if you're, sort of hearing this and you're like, oh, like focusing on targeting the superintendent is so much harder than this one principal, that is true. So you want to think about how can you build relationships with students at other schools within that district. Like you want to start small, right? And start where you are with building a team. So start with the other students and other classmates at your school. But then if you're targeting the superintendent, you'll have to think about like, okay, at all the other high schools, do I know like a friend of a friend who goes there and I can talk to them one-on-one, for example. So yeah, generally I would say it's most likely the superintendent, although of course, like, many school districts are different. That would be my general answer.
Thank you, Kinjo. One question we have from a guest is for Kino. How have you been digitally organizing in the age of COVID? How have you retained members or organizing capacity virtually?
Sorry about that. Largely, we have been using a hybrid method of organizing. But before we even get into that, I think we have it's easy to do so, or just organize and bring in folks based off of like what is the topic, what is the issue, and what type of pre-engagement or pre-touch or pre-contact that you already have with folks. So like for this year we had about 60 folks come to our orientation, 30 folks stuck through, and 27 of those folks actually became members. And I think the orientation is where we act that glue sticks. It gets them to be committed because you become a member of something. Like you have ownership in this space. But a lot of those folks came from friends of young folks that was with us from last year, like friends, teachers that we have built relationships with. They ID folks like, oh, I think this person might be good for this space with y'all, right? And I think the orientation and like the rigorousness of the orientation and like just like the outcomes. I think because most people like, or like even think about student service providers, you're like, you got to get them considered. That's not the case. Like if you are actually educating young folks on something that they they are visually seeing but do not have a name for, that is what like gets felt. And I think this goes back to this like agitation piece. Like folks are like, oh, this is crappy. Like, of course I want to, I challenge my young folks all the time around this. They're like, I want to create change. And it's like, all right, fam, what does that actually mean? So I can help support that, right? So I think largely giving them, educating young folks want to be in a space that like actually uplifts their values and their views. So I think largely the orientation was really the glue to like keeping folks to stay involved, but it's really the initial contact and how you getting folks to be agitated, right? So we by September 9th we'll be closing out our campaign cycle, and then from October on through it's like recruitment. So my goal is to like how I'm going to be in schools, how am I going to be like taking up class presentations, how am I going to agitate young folks to be like, oh, this shit is not right, what can I do? And like from there, that's how we start to like initially bring in folks. But we did a hybrid method. We had some meetings online, and then we broke it off in like little small pods. So it'd be like one organizer with no more than 8 students. We have our own space. So it's like it was pretty easy to like, get parents to be okay with this, and then like have like folks have so much PP stuff and like all these different things.
Thanks, Kino. I believe that's all the time that we have today to answer questions, but we're definitely here as you receive and review the toolkit. If you have any questions or needs, definitely feel free to reach out. I'm going to ask my colleague Sydney to drop the link for the toolkit download in the chat, and then offer any final parting words from you, Kinjo, or you, Kino, before we close out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm so excited to see everyone on this call and folks being, based all over. I just want to say that, we are the ones we are waiting for. We see all these problems. We see, the violence and investment in more violence and criminalization through police and schools and policing generally. And we also see, that vision of reproductive justice and what it could look like if everybody had the resources that they need and deserve to survive and also to thrive. So I want to say, if you are hearing all of this and thinking about doing something in like similar to this campaign in your community, I really encourage you to do so. Always feel free to reach out for Advocates for Youth if you have questions about this specifically. And additionally, we have other resources on our website, like our Youth Activist Toolkit, that also provide more information about building grassroots campaigns, building people power to fight for the changes we all need and deserve. So thank you all for joining.
Awesome.
Yeah. Really, really grateful. Thank y'all so much for just listening. I think this piece around taking on self-determination, leadership, and really thinking about what is a leftist mindset and how do we become like really united around this work, right? So like if one of us win, we all win, because we start to mirror a lot of the stuff that like folks are doing. So definitely because continue to be engaged with what's happening nationally, and then just like taking things that's going to work for you, and then things that might not work for you, just like hold out. It might work for you later. But that's what I have.
Awesome, and thanks so much for joining and working with us on this, Kino. Again, the link for the toolkit is in the chat. You'll also get one following. Share it with your friends, your comrades, adult allies, everyone, and we'll see you at the next organizing event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.